Mobile hunters, the king of comfort has arrived. Go to tetherednation.com and check out the new Lockdown saddle. Over the past 2 years, Tethered has tested and refined a new approach to their saddle lineup. The Lockdown saddle takes the best-in-class features from the Phantom, like the UtiliBridge, comfort channels, and included an expandable saddle body with their Lockdown link construction to take saddle hunting to the next level of comfort. As if this wasn't enough, they developed Lockdown haulers, which has a slightly rigid internal frame structure, so you can easily unzip, zip, and access haulers with one hand. And if you're a guy like me with no junk in your trunk and have issues with your saddle staying put while you're walking in to hunt, the Lockdown modular yoke solves this problem. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. Welcome to the Truth of a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 356. Today, I'm joined by Jake Kremer to talk about chasing North Idaho mountain whitetails, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. I hope you're doing well. I hope you are feeling fine. And now I think every state across the country is whitetail season is open. The Pennsylvania statewide opener was this past weekend. And I know I had 2 previous weeks I was able to get out, but had stuff going on during the course of the weekend. First weekend, I had some stuff going on. The second weekend, it was whatever that hurricane tropical depression thing was, it just kind of dumped rain. And so that kind of was a wash. So last weekend was the first weekend that I had a chance to get out. And I kind of made a promise to myself in the off season that I was going to go to the North Piece as often as I possibly could this fall, just to try to get, I don't know that I'll actually fill a tag up there because I'm still kind of learning pieces of it. And I've kind of started hunting a piece that I haven't hunted yet, that I've hung cameras on historically, scouted some, but haven't hunted at all. And so I kind of told myself every weekend in October, or until I leave for Kansas, I was going to make my way up there and put on some hunts and scout and check cameras and try to start figuring some stuff out. So I did that this past weekend. I did a little truck camping. I put a top on my truck last year so I could actually camp in the back of that for these short trips, because the trailer is great if I'm going to be gone 3-4 days, something like that, where I need a few more amenities, if you will, a little bit more space. But the back of the truck works great if I'm just going up for like 1, maybe 2 nights. I can just buzz out, after work on Friday at some point, go up, sleep in the back of the truck and be there and ready to roll. And so that's what I did this past weekend. Got some good intel, pulled a few cameras in this newer area. I didn't make it to the old stomping grounds, and I say old stomping grounds only because I've actually hunted that piece on the opposite side. I didn't make my way over there. I know there's a couple good deer over there, and timing's probably not quite right to hunt those areas at the moment. So I really kind of focused my attention on this newer area that I've hung cameras historically, but just have never hunted, and did some scouting, found some sign, pulled some cameras, a couple really good deer, and then ended up setting up to hunt in an area that I thought might be kind of interesting. Just kind of a terrain feature that should funnel some deer in out of this one. I guess there's a newer cut, I guess, in this particular area that kind of would funnel deer into this spot. There's kind of a terrain feature, kind of like a rim that kind of wraps around, almost kind of creates this bowl. And when I say a rim, like, it's not a ton of elevation. I mean, the elevation change might only be, goodness, I don't know, probably maybe 20, 30 feet, in one area, maybe 50 feet, and then in the other side, maybe 100, maybe. And so it's not a ton. It's just enough to kind of push the deer into a particular spot. So that's where I set up last night, and didn't see a damn thing. Did get eaten alive by mosquitoes, though. But that was kind of to be expected, I guess. In hindsight, I probably should have set up where I had found the sign while I was scouting earlier in the day. I found a relatively fresh rub line. Also had some pictures of a deer who I got him right after he peeled velvet, and so I knew he was in the area, 2 different areas actually where I pulled cameras, and I had a hunch that he might be living in and around that spot. There were 2 kind of setups I had thought of. Well, three actually. One where I actually set up, like, that was kind of like the spot that I kind of looked at prior to even going up that I wanted to set up because the wind was going to be right for access. There's two kind of access routes. One's kind of really long, and you actually have to kind of walk through some decent stuff to get into it, which isn't ideal. It's still a good hunt. Like if you have to use that access, it's just not ideal. And then the wind that I had yesterday allows me to kind of come in, basically rip right up over this little ridge, I guess, if you will, and down into a bottom and then into this bowl. And it's a little shorter access. I want to say it's maybe like 400 yards or something like that from where I can kind of hop out of the truck. But the more important part was like I was walking in with basically a crosswind, so most of the wind was in my face, which was perfect. But once I got to the tree to set up, like the crosswind was actually the exact wind you would want for those deer that might be coming out of that little cut area into this kind of like little funnel. And so based on the wind, it was the right place to set up. And however, in hindsight, maybe I should have thought about the area where I found that fresh rub line a little bit harder. The other spot I'd thought of is there's like a swampy area that's not too far from there. And in years past, it's not been super grown up. I don't know if it's because it's just the growth is it's growing up just over age, or if it's or if it's just I'm there earlier in the year than I've been in the past to kind of check it out. So the other thought was just to kind of actually set up and do an observation sit, because there's so much area that this kind of swampy area kind of covers that I have a hard time believing that there's not a good buck or two just laying in that. And actually, a good buddy of mine in the past is actually, in walking in a certain way, has actually bumped decent bucks up out of that spot. So those were the three kind of areas I was playing with, but I ended up opting for the one where I had the better wind access early in the season, so don't want to go boogering stuff up. And so that was kind of the plan. I was like, maybe I catch lightning in a bottle here, but I know my access is good, my wind is good, and so everything should remain clean. For me to come back, the following weekend and hunt it, and nothing be none the wiser that I have. That I've been there. But beyond that, man, the other part I was stoked about this past weekend is I was actually, now I hunted with my low poundage bow since I busted up my shoulder. It's still healing. It's getting better, but we'll see. But I was actually able to shoot my Hoyt, so my regular bow with like the normal, with my normal draw weight. So I fired a couple arrows late last week with that. So I'm optimistic that maybe by this weekend I might be able to shoot that consistently. I don't know. I think after I get done recording this, I'm going to go out and give it a couple rips and see how it feels. And I'll be super stoked if I can actually get that thing back in my arsenal. Because the truth be told, where I was set up last night, it was I was probably not set up in the exact right spot, especially with shooting a lower poundage bow at the moment. It was gonna be a challenge to get a shot to where I think, in hindsight, where I thought that once I got into the tree and I could kind of see everything where I thought the deer might come out. Fortunately, nothing did, so it wasn't like I botched that, but. Shooting a lower poundage bow just really kind of shrinks in my killable area. Mainly, hand-to-hand combat with a prison shiv is basically what I got going on versus my normal bow, which I don't take long shots in general. But some of this area where I hunt in this north piece, it does get a little bit open. And I know that we are always kind of looking for the thick, nasty stuff to hunt in, but some of these places where that's just kind of how the terrain, lays out and the foliage lays out, and how like the connection pieces between one piece of habitat to the next, sometimes there are these areas that are a little bit more open where you do have, more shot opportunities and so forth. And then this was certainly one of those places where maybe, I might have to take a little longer range. When I say a longer range shot, it's like, I could get out to 40 yards or something like that. Where with my current setup in a busted up shoulder, I'm really kind of looking at to stay within that 25 yard kind of range, which is usually, 90% of the time, that's plenty for me in my setups, but it just so happened this one was just a little bit different. But with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's show. I have a cool show for you guys today. I got my buddy Jake Kremer on. Jake is a new friend of mine I was introduced to by an old friend, my buddy Wilson McSwain. You guys know him, love him. He's been on the show a bunch. So Wilson moved to Idaho, some time ago. I hunted with him last year in Idaho for the opening of elk season. And he's made friends with Jake. And Jake has opened an archery shop in Idaho. So if you're out west looking for an archery shop, North Idaho Archery is what he opened up in the Coeur d'Alene. And Wilson texted me, he's like, hey, you got to have this guy on. He's a killer, kills, giant whitetails in the mountains. And I'm always intrigued, especially after being out there, seeing that terrain and trying to figure out like how the hell would somebody actually hunt whitetails in this terrain and ever kill one. Access is tough. The terrain is tough, and they just seem to have every advantage. Aside from being, also they're, skittish because they've got mountain lions and grizzlies and other things that are trying to kill them more consistently than humans. So humans are usually, the least of their worries. And then the other connection point was that he's actually friends with Troy Pottinger, and he kind of falls under that category of a very similar kind of hunting style. And Jake kills hammers out there. And so I'm always intrigued by people who kill big deer, mature deer more specifically, in really, really hard places to hunt. And so Jake fit that bill. And I wanted to have him on just to kind of talk. It's also interesting too, because it's rare that I actually have a guest on where we both have knowledge of a specific area. So there were some spots last year that in elk hunting, Wilson and I found some really, really good whitetail sign. Hammers, huge, like the biggest scrape I've ever seen. Probably the biggest scrape I've ever seen. And just giant rubs, like mammoth rubs. And Jake knows exactly where those are at. And so we were actually able to talk about those specific areas and the access and setups for those spots. So that was kind of cool because I've not often talked to someone on the show where we actually both have knowledge of the same exact sign, same exact spots. So that was kind of cool. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I've gone out west. I actually used my secret weapon. My secret weapon is Wilson McSwain. He turned me on to this fella. He became good friends with the guy you're seeing on the other side of the screen here from me. But it's none other than Mr. Jake Kremer from Idaho. What's going on, man?
Not a lot, man. Busy day processing elk that I harvested this week, so it's been a busy week.
Nice, man. That's a good kind of busy to have, man. That's I'll take that. I always enjoy, of course, I think we all do as hunters, we enjoy being out in the mountains, doing what we love to do, right? But there comes a point in time, especially elk hunting, where it's like you get some days in, you're like, good Lord, man, I just want to fill a tag because I want to be done,
I'm like that every year with elk. Obviously, whitetails kind of have my heart. And so, this year, I really kind of put a lot more effort into elk than I have previously, and that paid off. Obviously, but I had 100 miles on my boots before I even laid eyes on them out. All the scouting I had done all summer was for naught. Honestly, it was good to finally get into them.
Yeah, you guys had a bunch of. I know I was talking to Wilson because I know the place that he and I hunted together out there last year was basically all covered up in fire this year, and so I know he was hunting in a completely different area from where he was at last year, and it was all kind of brand new territory. Did you have a similar thing, or were you at least lucky enough to where areas that maybe you knew or were aware of, weren't on fire?
Well, actually, I had a similar thing last year. Two of my whitetail spots last year. I had some good deer in there, and pretty much got pushed out because of the fires. This year, I was lucky enough. I mean, I have had a terrible year finding whitetails, but as far as elk goes, I didn't get pushed out of any of my areas. It's just one of those things that, whether the wolves moved in or whatever it is. And I think part of it being I'm so far away from people, trying to get away from people, that I'm in pretty low elk densities. So when that goes on to a couple new drainages, they're just gone.
Right. Man, I'm curious, man, because, as, being a Westerner, most guys I know are buddies that I have that are from the West. Like, they're usually like elk guys first and foremost, and they might dabble in whitetail hunting once in a while, like just for, shits and giggles, maybe, right? Like, maybe they filled their elk tag and maybe they killed a muley too, and it's like, yeah, we'll go whitetail hunt because I don't have anything better to do. And Wilson's kind of actually turned that way. Like, he's more interested in that. And I think for him, obviously being newer out there, it's like he's just stoked the fact that he lives in a place that he can actually hunt these things that you don't have access to, living in a place like Pennsylvania. But I'm curious, how did a Westerner, how is it that you are more ate up with whitetails than you are necessarily elk? How did that happen?
It's It's interesting you ask that because I'm definitely in a low percentage
Yeah.
group out here. Honestly, it's probably the household that I grew up in. Stepmom wasn't really a huge fan of hunting. Dad wasn't a big outdoorsman. We go fishing every once in a while. He didn't grow up on big game, and so he took me out the first couple of times until I got my hunting license and my driver's license, and kind of like, hey, go figure it out yourself, And so it was one of those things that was by necessity. I could only hunt whitetails because there was never enough freezer room. My stepmom made sure of that. I didn't have a lot of buddies who did elk hunt. I didn't have a lot of buddies who whitetail hunted either. It was one of those things that went out there and to figure it out. And frankly, I sucked for a few years. But yeah, I think it just became out of necessity. And then I became fairly good at hunting whitetails. I kind of became the guy, like guys that called and said, hey, I need to get my buck. Can you come help me? And from there, it just kind of became the drive that held me on away. And, I think elk are one of those things that you really, really have to love the pursuit. It's, you got to be okay with running into people in the woods. You have to be okay with public pressure because, unlike whitetails where you go into the whitetail country, generally there's whitetail there. You go into elk woods, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be elk there. You can find all sorts of elk signs. They're 15 miles away. So when you find the elk, usually 2 or 3 other guys have also found the elk. Unless you just really push yourself into some spots that guys don't want to go into, which is kind of what Wilson's doing, which is what I did this year. I really put myself into getting into some of that stuff that, isn't necessarily the backcountry, but it is definitely country that most guys on foot don't want to walk into.
Right. Yeah, and it makes sense too that, when you just kind of mentioned, like, when people say from around PA, or just East Coast or, Midwest, if they don't grow up in hunting families, and they are hardcore hunting families, they still usually end up finding their way into deer hunting one way or another, but just because that's kind of like the big game of the area. And it's not super limited or limiting in terms of like your access to it. Right. Especially even if you're like a young kid, if you got like a back 40 or something like that you grew up on a PA, you can at least hunt that back 40 and you really don't need much hand holding. You can go out and figure it out and have some fun and make a bunch of mistakes. And even if you don't, there's plenty of public ground around. You can go traipse around the public ground until you mess up a bunch of hunts and kind of figure it out, right? But when you're talking about Western hunting, like there's not a whole lot of, like even as a grown adult, like because I didn't start elk hunting until I was, a grown man, like so I was in my 30s, right? And I would have went out and done an elk hunt on my own, but man, it was a lot nicer having a buddy who lived in Montana that I could go with for the first time to kind of see and like understand, like, all right, how do you play the wind and the thermals a little bit differently in the mountains? Like, how do you go about glassing? How do you go about finding the right habitat to find them in? Like, just all the stuff like that, because it's just so much more area and just harder, right? Like, you're talking about elevation gain. You're talking about, especially like some areas, like if you're in Colorado and some areas, and some of the areas actually I was in Montana, just like the altitude, you know what I mean? Just, especially if you're doing like any type of high country hunt or something like that in those types of places, it's like, it's not just challenging, like it can be borderline dangerous and kind of stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you get yourself in a jackpot in a hurry,
Yeah.
It's, and again, just, it's one of those things that, hey, you're going into nasty country, you're going into high country, and you're not necessarily finding out, right? Like I talked to a biologist, and there's a local herd around here near where I live, and the herd does, I think it's 42-mile loop, and so if you're not on them in that 42-mile loop, you're not on them, right? Like you're a truck ride away from wherever these elk are. And so, yeah, it's just different. It's a tough hunt. It's not like
Yeah, especially where you're at too, man. Like, especially where you're at in Idaho, like, because that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me. Hunting out there with Wilson last year was, just him telling me like how the terrain's different, how kind of rugged it is, thick it is, steep it is, right, stuff like that, and that there's not a lot of glassing opportunities and stuff like that. Because my previous elk hunt was in western Montana, so I was close to the border of Idaho, but it was in kind of like, I guess what you might refer to as like the high desert or something like that, right, where a lot of glassing opportunities, where there were definitely days where you might do 10 miles. I think the longest day we did was like 15, but most days were probably like closer to that, like 6 to 8. You know what I mean? Like, because we could spend a lot of time glassing and just watching a big area, and it's like, and we weren't really going to move. Like, we knew there were elk in the general area, and we were going to find them first before we were going to make any type of move. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But where you're at, that's not necessarily the situation. There's very limited glassing opportunities, and
yeah, I talked to some guys who want to come out here and elk hunt, tell us some stories about some elk up on the last year I called in 5 bulls, and I had 5 bulls at less than 20 yards, and I couldn't see him. And he was that thick. I could see the tops of their antlers raking trees. I could hear them bugling, screaming in my face. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell I was getting an arrow in him.
right.
And so it's just, calling in elk is one thing. Getting in their wheelhouse with a shooting lane is a whole other. And it sounded like your hunt with Wilson was kind of that way. With you guys, the way you made it sound, you guys were in elk a lot. You guys didn't have a lot of shooting opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, that's, everyone asked me how the trip was, because they think, bummer, you go out and you just spend the time and stuff like that. You come home empty-handed. But I was like, I think we were in elk every single day. I was like, I was literally close enough to hear them. I was like, where they might have only been 50 yards away, 40 yards away, but I just couldn't see them. You know what I mean? Like, you could hear them. You would hear some cow calling. Like, they weren't ripping bugles yet. Like, I was there the first week of the season, like the opening week. And so they weren't quite fired up yet. I was like, but like, I was in and around them every day. I was like, it's just, there was one time we saw them, and at that point it was like 3 yards away from me. It was like so close. It was like a little unnerving. Like, and then there was like a herd of 20 that come like running by us because we spooked them, But yeah, it's just a whole different world, that area. Hunting elk in that type of country. It's just, they're hard enough to kill, and hunting them in that type of country is just an added difficulty that a person like me doesn't need.
Well, and to kind of get into, I guess, what we're getting into here is now you try to hunt a mature whitetail and that stuff.
Yeah, man. Like, because it So first, before we jump into that, I want to get into that in a second. But how did you? So you didn't come from a hunting family. You started deer hunting because it sounds like it was really kind of the path of least resistance for you, right? Like, it was probably the thing that was most accessible. Elk hunting was probably a little less accessible and stuff like that. But how did you get into like hunting, like focusing on mature whitetails? Like, when did that kind of start happening?
So I kind of got to give credit to Troy. I think you've had him on your podcast before. Troy Cottender for all the rest of your listeners. I hunted whitetails for a long time. I killed a lot of big bucks. And big bucks to me at that time, a 4.5-year-old was a giant. I would, 130s. I think the biggest one I had before I met Troy was like a 142. And, I was consistently killing deer every year, but I really didn't put the dots together. I wasn't really looking at it analytically until I had met Troy. And I had kind of started archery hunting 2 or 3 years prior to that, because I grew up a rifle hunter. I didn't know a single archery hunter growing up. People just didn't own bows. It just wasn't the culture. And so I was kind of the outside guy in the archery world in general. And then, I really wanted to pick up whitetail hunting with them. And so got to talking with Troy, and he really kind of helped me connect some missing dots I was missing. And from there, I really kind of put a lot of my own effort and time and thought into how to get into it. yeah, it was really kind of my connection with Troy that really snowballed into the mature whitetails in the mountains. And, even where I grew up, so I grew up down in Lewiston, Idaho, and the country down there is different than the country up here. And, guys, I don't know, guys in Lewiston really think they live in North Idaho, but until you get into North Idaho country, it ain't North Idaho.
Right.
I had to damn near relearn everything I knew about whitetails coming up here because it's just a completely different game. And they're surviving in some extreme areas that you just couldn't imagine finding a whitetail.
Right. Well, how did you meet Troy?
So I was working as a deputy for the county that Troy is in, and I had kind of followed Troy on social media several years prior to that, and I was watching him kill these big deer, and initially I was like, I really don't like this guy. How this guy doing this? Like, I live in Idaho. I'm not finding deer. Like, he's doing something, right? He's something nefarious. And I, after 2 or 3 years, kind of maturing and kind of watching what he was doing, I think this dude's kind of the real deal. And
right.
So I reached out to Troy, just as a stranger on the internet, and said, hey, this is who I am. This is, what I do for a living. Would love to, buy some of the buck feeder product from you and kind of talk whitetails with you and really just kind of get a better understanding of what I'm missing. And I'm missing stud component here. And so, I connected with Troy through social media, and I drove out to his house in my patrol car. Being a county deputy, I was able to just kind of go wherever I wanted. So I showed up in uniform, and we, not a deputy anymore. My supervisor back then probably would have been tickled, but we'd probably talk whitetails for 3.5 hours before we kind of parted ways there. And from there, we just kind of, blossomed a friendship. And, I think he realized I was very like-minded, very similar mindset with what I wanted to do in the whitetail world. And he really, that first year, helped me out a lot on understanding, what elevations I'm looking for, what vegetation I'm looking for, what I was doing wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we met. I guess the long answer is short there.
Right.
Just through social media and me just kind of being a stranger on the internet. And
nice. Yeah, Troy's good people, man. I always like talking to him. I met him the same way. Was just through social media. Similar type of thing. We had a couple mutual friends, and I was just kind of following along, and he was just killing deer in a place that I was like, man, just seems, again, the idea that someone is lives in the West and is that into whitetails. And I know he hunts elk as well and stuff like that, but it's just like, that was the thing that kind of intrigued me. I was like, that seems like a hard place to hunt. Like, I would never, and I would think of, like, I get it. Like, if you're in Montana, some like the low country in Montana, like, whitetail hunting can be decent, you know what I mean? Or where you have a target rich environment, if you will, right? Like, there's plenty of deer, right? And when I start, and like, I hunt mountains around PA, and nothing compared to what Idaho is, right? But I also just know, like, hunting the mountains that I do hunt, it's like, man, it's not target rich, even like, in a state like PA where you do have a lot of deer, but you get into some of those really kind of rough areas. It's like the deer numbers either aren't the same, or at least in my case in PA, it's like, I think they're probably the same where I'm at. It's just, it's very specific, like, where they're at, and you're either in them or you're not even close, and that's kind of how the mountains hunting. And so I was really intrigued to talk to him at first, just because of that. And that's also why, like, in talking to Wilson, he's like, hey, I got a buddy that I've met out here. He's like, you should totally talk to. He's like, killing deer in the mountains, and he'd mentioned you and Troy were friends and stuff. And I was like, well, shit, yeah. I was like, I got to talk to this guy then. I was like, because I'm always intrigued. But for people that are listening, you mentioned, that you almost had to kind of relearn things moving from where you had lived in Idaho, like whenever you kind of went to the north or whatever. It's like, it was just, a different ball game. So making that move, what was unique and challenging for that particular location in chasing mature whitetails versus where you had come from?
Yeah, so down there by Lewiston, the breaks of the Clearwater and the Snake River and around there, target rich environment like we're talking about. The deer densities are fairly high. There's a lot of ag fields. Most of them are in the canyons, so you're not trying to get above these deer. You're not trying to figure out what elevation, and you know where they're at. They're in these canyons. They're bedding in these canyons. They're moving up into the ag fields to feed. Honestly, if you spend any amount of time trying to figure out whitetails, you can figure them out pretty damn easy in these canyons. They're coming up to North Idaho, no glassing opportunities, right? You're talking thick brush, high elevations, steep faces, terrible thermals, swirly wings, and deer that just don't daylight. Right? We're talking predators that I've never had to deal with before. Those canyons, they have some predators, they have some bears, not very high density. One spot I hunted last year, I had 15 different bears on camera in my scrape in a 2-week period. And identifiably different based on color, size, marking.
Black bear or brown bear?
A lot of black bear. One particular area I was hunting, grizzly, dense area. I had one bear that was large enough and brown enough that was like, man, that could be a grizzly, but it wasn't good enough picture to say one way or another. But so yeah, really just kind of trying to figure out where are these deer living, because you're not going into similar to the elk we're talking about. You're not going into deer country and necessarily finding deer. I think that's one thing that maybe your listeners should understand, is that 2 out of 3 spots that I put in, or I scout, or I throw a scrape up for cameras, might not produce a deer. And that's what's happened to me this year. Honestly, I had 3 or 4 dynamite spots, and I'm like, there is gonna be a giant here. And it just had everything I was looking for. Had the elevation, had the terrain, had the vegetation. And I think in 3.5 months, I got a doe on camera.
Wow.
And so you're talking 1 to 3 deer per square mile. You got to be okay with sitting in the stand for 10 to 12 hours and seeing a deer. Mm-hmm. It's very, very, very low opportunity, but there's a reason why big mature bucks are there, right? Right. Most guys aren't willing to do it.
Right. So from where you moved from to here, so less target rich, right? Now, was the quality or age structure better in northern Idaho than versus where you came from?
Yes and no. Depending on the particular area you were in. If there's one area I hunted down by Lewiston that there's huge swaths of private land. So some of the deer were able to get a lot of age structure. Up here in northern Idaho, where there are a lot of deer, where the opportunities are there, there's also a ton of hunts. So the age structure is fair. Okay. The other part of it is that our winters are extremely hard where a lot of these big bucks are at. And so if I can get a buck to 5.5 years old, 6.5 years old, I'm pretty stoked. Yeah, because by the time they hit 4.5, they're running so damn hard that it's a rough winter. You gotta lose another one, get out.
Right.
Yeah. And so oftentimes, we're trying not to kill them until they're 5.5 years old. One of my biggest bucks I've ever killed out was 4.5 years old, and it was a deer you wouldn't pass up anywhere in the country. 160 change. Right. So you still hear me?
Yep, I still got you.
Okay, my computer just okay, I got you back. So yeah, there's a lot of age structure up here. A little bit better age structure, I guess, to answer your question. The genetics aren't necessarily the best in the age structure, right? We have some bucks that at 2.5 and 3.5 years old, you can tell they're just going to be absolute mega giants. And then this year I've got 2 6.5-year-olds on camera that I'm probably going to end up shooting. But I just have, I literally have nothing else.
Right.
Neither one of them are going to go over 130.
Right. So I'm curious, if so I'm just curious for you, what the allure of hunting whitetails in rugged country like that is, right? Because it's kind of crazy. It's like I've been there. Like I told Wilson, like when we were out there hunting elk together, I was like, I can't imagine hunting deer in this place. You know what I mean? I was like, I would do it. I was like, but I feel like I'd be asking a farmer around there somewhere for some access to some private ground to get on, you know what I mean, to where the hunt's a little easier. But whenever you see some of the sign and things like that in certain areas, there was an area we walked up over looking for some elk, and we found the biggest scrape I've ever seen in my life. Like at first when I saw it, I was like, man, is that a bed? But it couldn't have been a bed. Like just the shape of it just said it wasn't a bed, and there was a looking branch that was there and stuff like that, Because when I first saw it, I was like, oh man, there's a huge bed. At first I was thinking maybe an elk bed, right? But it was still too small to be an elk bed. And I was like, well, it's not a deer bed. And then I saw like the looking branches as we got closer. I was like, holy shit, man. I was like, this thing's a scrape. And it was just like the size of a freaking car hood, like just giant. And then not far from there was probably one of the biggest rubs I'd ever seen, and I was like, man, that's a hammer deer. Whatever's using that, I was like, is not a small deer.
So there's the allure, right? It is 99.9% of guys out here aren't doing it. Can't do it. Unwilling to do it. And yeah, I could go talk to a farmer. I could go on some ag land, but generally those are low-lying, populations. There's a lot of opportunities, but you don't have the big mature bucks because there are, frankly, the farmers allow quite a few people to hunt. And so 99.9% of everyone in Idaho is an opportunity hunt. So you're just not, you're not getting those opportunities at big mature whitetails. And so the allure is A, you're doing something no one else is doing. B, you're have the opportunity to get in close on a giant specimen of a whitetail that probably no one else has even laid eyes on. Wilson showed me the picture of that scrape. That's the giant scrape. That's a textbook giant mountain community scrape, and that's what you're looking for. You look around there and you think to yourself, how the hell have been hunting deer? How do you do it? Right. Well, that's honestly, it's almost an advantage as an archery hunter because I get in the air and I figure out where the bedding areas are. Like, that's the particular scrape. I haven't been in there with Wilson. He wants me to go in there and help him on that particular one. But just depending on what the winds and the thermals are doing there, it may not be honorable, but if you can get off of it, get on that edge of that bedding area, you might have a better advantage than a rifle hunter ever would, because the rifle hunter is just going to go walking through the woods. He's going to be 90% of the time on the ground, and he's not going to be able to use that a little bit of elevation in the tree to use those thermals to his advantage. And the allure to go out to the east, I'll tell you, is high. I would absolutely love to go and enjoy a deer hunt where I see 30 deer in an evening. There's just stuff I'd love to go watch bucks being bucks chasing does. It just doesn't happen here. You get to see plenty of 2.5, 3.5 does chasing deer, but would I enjoy a hunt that's maybe not so grinding and grueling? Absolutely, but this is what's in my backyard. And so you kind of got to figure it out, and you just got to be willing to commit to killing big deer. And the only way to do that is by going into these nasty wooded areas. Even then, I had an area last year that to kind of give myself away a little bit. I could see Canada from my tree stand.
Oh, nice.
And I was hunting a deer that, frankly, I'll I think would have been a new Idaho state record. I could have killed a giant deer. But rifle season opened up, and all the scouting and everything I had done, all the scrapes I had built, everything, all the work just went straight out the window. The rifle hunters in North Idaho have also kind of adapted to figuring out where these whitetail are at, and so they're running down these steep ridges. They're running out in bedding areas, and hoping they jump these bucks. And so I could have killed that deer opening evening of hunting season, and I wasn't in the stand. I didn't even have a stand, honestly, where I had him on camera. Yeah, I got him on a straight that, frankly, I was like, there's no chance. You just never know. It's a web of cameras, right? You got to figure out where this deer's going. And opening day, he was standing there broadside, daylight, sure as shit, he'd have been dead. But as soon as the rifle hunter moved in, he'd gone. Right. So that's the other complexity to the issue out here is finding deer, that are getting to that giant mature status, and having them not get just pushed into the next county. Because, I mean, you saw there's so much ground out here; those deer can disappear. I mean, yeah. And I don't think what people realize out here, especially, is that our deer are super nomadic. I mean, like, I'll get a deer on camera 7 miles apart in the sitting evening, and it's not uncommon. It's not unusual. They just travel. And I think it's to the effect, because we have such low deer densities, they'd have to, right? They have to go find those does. They have to go see who's still alive, who's moving into the area, who's doing what. And so, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think a long-winded.
No, that's it. I mean, I totally get it. After being there and seeing what I saw, that's cool that Wilson showed you that, because that was just like, when I saw that, I was like, man, yeah, I'd probably try to figure out how to hunt that. It's but you're right. I mean, I was thinking about, like, we sat there for a second. I mean, even though we were whitetail, it was funny because, we had a camera guy with us, and Wilson and I stopped there. We saw that scrape. He didn't know what a scrape was, because he's never really hunted deer like that before. He's like, what are you talking about? We're like, this, it's a scrape. He's like, what do you mean? And so we kind of explained it to him. And then Wilson and I stood there for like a couple minutes, like, thinking about it. And I was like, man, I wonder where that deer's bedded. And we were like looking at the map and like talking about it. He's like, I've never seen two people care so much about where a deer might live, which was kind of funny. But as I was standing there, I was like saying to Wilson, I was like, man, I don't even know how I would go about trying to get in here to hunt him. You know what I mean? I was like, because it was so hard to get into that spot to begin with. It's so steep. You know what I mean? And I was like, I feel like you would almost just like, unless you know for sure, like, what area he's bedded in, because once you hit like a certain, it was all pretty clean walking until we hit like a certain elevation point, and then it just got super thick and just like nasty and shitty. And I was like, you have to know like where he wants to bed on like whatever wind is, like, because the chances of him hearing you come up through there, like, you're never going to get there before he knows that you're there. You know what I mean? I was like, or you have to come in the complete opposite way, or you got to come in like way down the ridge line and try to walk the ridge. But it was so nasty and shitty on top to try to walk that whole ridge line out to where he was at, or where he might have been, it was almost like crazy man talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's, there's 2 scrapes that I've found in my life that are like that, where, there's a giant in there, but there's not a snowball's chance in hell you could hunt it.
Right.
I mean, every which direction you come from, you'd be sweating like hell before you got there. He would hear you coming a mile away. And I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why these deer have these scrapes where they have these scrapes. Sometimes they're just in a spot that they know. And you throw a camera on it, guarantee that there's in their daylight. He's bedded up nearby. He's safe. He knows he's safe. The thermals are perfect for him. Any predator that comes into there, he knows it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, looking at it on the map with Wilson, it looked like one of those spots where I was like, wow, I don't think you can do it.
Right. But you know what? He will try it. I promise you.
We're gonna go in there with him. We're gonna give it a shot. See if we can figure out. if I remember right, on which side of the mountain it's on, it's also just a pretty terrible spot for our prevailing winds. And so, yeah, we're going to go give it a shot. We'll see what we can do. But yeah, there's sometimes.
So this is a great, because I don't usually have the opportunity like this with people that have on the show that we have like knowledge about the same spot together, right? And so this is kind of cool because, you know, a lot of times I have guys on and I can ask them about like, you know, elevation lines and stuff like that, but like I actually know where this spot is. And so I'm curious to know from you, like when you saw that, was it at about the elevation you would think that that's at, and like what elevation do you typically kind of like key in on?
Yeah. If I remember right, that was sitting at about 36 to 38 meters. Yeah. So that's like textbook where I would like to be. A lot of my spots I can't get that elevation, but if I'm on a mountain that's 5,000, 6,000 foot high, I'm going to start at 3,300 and I'm going to go up to 4,800. And that's where I'm going to be looking for my community scrapes. That's where I'm going to be putting in my scrapes. Anywhere below that, I've got to have something forcing my deer down. Right? I'm looking for something that's forcing them below that elevation line, whether that's a major road system, whether that be a major Forest Service system or something to that effect, of pushing them downhill. Those bucks want to be above those does, and it would blow a lot of people's minds how high those deer will hang. You know, for a lot of a year, you know, I mean, until there's 18, 20 inches of snow on the ground, he'll just stay there. And that's why I allow them to get winter kill, you know, because they stay there, there's 14, 15 inches on the ground, and then overnight we get 18 inches of snow.
Right.
They're stuck up there.
So that was kind of textbook elevation for like where you would.
Yeah. Textbook elevation, because oftentimes you'll get those bucks bedded at that 36 to 3,800 feet. You know, that's not a bad spot for them to be bedded. That's big mature bucks. The real loner deer, you know, they're going to go higher. Then you're going to get 4,500 to 5,000. You're not going to find a ton of deer up that high, but you'll find one and two, right? But if a little bit higher density, a little bit more higher average, I guess you'd say 3,600 to 4,400 feet is where them bucks are more than likely. And a lot of times it's because that's where that woody browse, that brush is, that's where that bedding area, that's where it's going to be best on the mountain. That's the area. And so that, I guess to your question, where that scrape was that you guys stumbled upon, that's a textbook elevation where I want to be. And it sounds like him to be bedded out.
Right, because it sounded also like, just as you were describing that kind of setup, like a lot of what we were seeing as far as like the vegetation was what you were kind of describing. And it was like just a ton of like, it just got like, here I would almost refer to it as like mountain laurel or something like that, but it wasn't mountain laurel. It was a lot thicker than that, and just none of it was any higher than like, you know, maybe 6 foot tall, you know, and just like brushy, whatever, and just like super close together. You know, you would find like a little trail through it. There would be like a little break you can make your way through, then it would just like close up, you know, and that was like basically from that point forward, that's all it was until you got to the top, and then it opened up on top just a little bit. But the trees weren't super big on the top, like they were actually lower canopy, you know, and that was the other place where we found I think there were some rubs and stuff that were in there, and maybe a little bit of scat that was in there too. But so what type of vegetation are you typically kind of looking for to find these setups?
Yeah, so I'm looking for that hard browse, you know. And the problem is that a lot of times you're going in the spring and summer trying to set up these spots, and so you got all this super nice lush green vegetation, and that's not what I'm looking for. Right? That's great in the summertime, but oftentimes my bread and butter is late season. And so what kind of hard browse are they going to have near a bedding area for late season? Like, what is going to be here to sustain them as long as they don't get pushed out? And so, yeah, I'm looking for, you know, all that auction spray. I'm looking for huckleberries. And huckleberries is huge.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'll have deer that'll follow my huckleberry patches up the mountain. You know, they'll start at 2,600 feet when they start getting ripe in late June, And then by the end of August, that deer's up at 4,800, 5,000 feet because that's where the huckleberries are there, you know. And so, yeah, just really any of that hard browse, you know, deer eating. Especially when I go into a new area, I'm looking for that hard browse that's been eaten off, that's been chewed down, that I know should be 4 or 5 feet tall, but the thing is only 1.5 feet tall. It's because it's been chewed down every year for the last 8 years. If it's right. You know, if you could find trees that, you know, looks like the deer been eating that soft browse off of the bottom of it. One of my spots in the mountains, next time you come out here, I'd love to take you to it, show you the spot. It's stupid. It looks like a city park. Unlike anything you'd ever found in the mountains. I'm 20 some odd miles from the nearest ag field, and it is as flat as you can imagine on the edge of this mountain. And the trees are eaten as high up as the deer can eat them. You can see underneath everything. And you got huckleberry brush and hard browse that's been eaten down to about 1 foot tall everywhere you look. And last year, now it's a lower elevation spot. That's the problem with it, is it's only at about 2,700 foot. But it's got one of those barriers that I talked about that force deer down, right? And so I just knew, I was like, there's going to be deer in here, obviously. The deer sign's everywhere in here. They're eating this thing down to nothing. And I sat in there one day, and at one point I saw 22 does at one time, which doesn't happen.
Right.
This doesn't happen. It's unheard of. I've never seen it before. It was unbelievable. No bucks. All right. It's just, the bucks just don't live there. And so where the bucks are, they're way, way, way down in this drainage below me. Because I can, you know, I walk this thing, I can tell where the bucks are living. I'm on the edge of this. I mean, it's as flat can be, and then it just drops off. I mean, it flips off. And those bucks know it. They know where to stay. And so there's a barrier on the bottom of this. I don't want to give too much away, but
yeah,
there's a barrier on the bottom of this drainage, and there's a barrier on top of this drainage. And so it compresses these deer. And sure enough, late season, I got snowed out. Go and check my camera, and there's just giant bucks running around chasing these does everywhere. And it's one of those magical spots where you sit there and you're like, this isn't really happening. Like, this is stupid.
Right.
It felt like I was on the city park because there was just so many deer. Problem with that, the predators on it.
It's like fish in a barrel for them there.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, the last time I hunted it before I got snowed out, I come toe to toe with a coyote that I watched take out a doe. Oh man, that's a fun story if you want me to go in.
Yeah, how wild was that, dude? That's like that's like watching Discovery Channel live.
Oh, it was insane. And I mean, growing up in North Idaho, I've never seen anything like it in my life. I've been sitting on this flat on the edge of the mountain for 9 hours, you know, and watching does feed back and forth all day long, eating this hard browse. And I think it's probably 3rd week in November. I'm thinking the buck is going to be around any minute. Didn't happen. And it's probably 40 minutes from the end of daylight, and I look down, and I hunt high, you know, I'm like 25 to 30 feet high. Look down at I don't even know why I looked down. I look down right at the base of my tree, and I just see this tail twitching in the brush. And holy shit, that is a cougar. And there was at that time, there was like 3 or 4 does feeding out in front of me. And he took off after those does, and he picked out the biggest one. And this is a giant Canadian genetic doe. And he hit her sideways, and she rolled his ass. I mean, he was probably only 120 pounds tall. And she rolled his ass. She spun on a dime, 180 dime, and took off. And he was standing there looking stupid at about 70 yards. And I thought to myself, well, shit, I could kill this deer with my bow. I'll just chaff call him back in, right? You know? So I start doing my deer calls. It sounded like a fawn. Sure enough, he starts walking straight back to me. Well, except the fact that he's a predator, he doesn't do what a deer does, right? He circles back around. He gets about 40 yards and disappears. shit, that's right. This isn't a deer. He's on dead email, right? So he's going to win to his advantage. So he circles back in the drainage behind me, and oh god, 15, 20 minutes less of daylight. I don't have a gun on me.
Oh,
I left the pistol in the truck, and so all I've got is the sliver slugger, and this is a bad situation. So anyway, I'm like, I got to get out of here. I get like, before I lose light, I got to get out of here so I can still see this cat. If push comes to shove, or if I got to do something, right? So I damn near jump out of this tree and start walking back to my truck. Of course, just doing 360s. Well, yeah, looking over my shoulder like, oh, this cat is somewhere close, right? It's close. And I got about 30 yards from my tree, and I looked back, and he is just crouched at the base of my tree, just locking eyes with me. Like this, right? Like that moment you feel, you're like, this is it. This is how I die. This is in the mountains, face to face with the cougar. And okay, so we have to back up a little bit. The other weird thing about these deer up there where I'm at, that I've never experienced anywhere else, that they actually respond to deer calls. I never got a deer call work in my life, in Idaho. And all these does all day long just bleeding and grunting. All that fawn bleeding and doe bleeding, another doe had come about as a drainage, and she doesn't see the cougar. She sees me backpedaling from the cougar, and she starts blowing and stomping and doing her thing, which saved my ass. He took off after her, and she never saw him. And the next thing I know, they were doing asso the kettle down the canyon, and I would run it for my life back to my truck. I didn't look back. I just kept going.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's that's the kind of adventure you can get in the mountains out here,
dude. That's crazy, man. Like, do you know Wilson's buddy Chancey? Do you know Chancey?
I know him.
You know, it was I guess he's born. I think he was in Colorado for a while, but I mean, he's been in North Idaho most of his life, and you know, he hunted with us, I think, like the last day or whatever of the hunt while I was out there, and we were just kind of BSing. Because when I hunted in Montana previously, that was, we weren't in grizzly country really at all. Maybe you would get a rogue one that would get off the beaten path, but it'd be very, very rare, if that were to happen. And so it was the first time, and there's not any, there's no mountain lions in that area and stuff like that. And so, maybe some black bears or whatever, but that's about it. So this is the first time I've ever been hunting in like legit predator country, where it's like, all right, we got wolves, we got, mountain lions, we've got grizzlies, and so I carried with me the whole time I was there. I had a 44 Magnum that I carried with me. And we didn't see anything the whole trip. And I was talking to Chancey, I was like, well, we had something in camp the first night. I don't know if Wilson ever told you that, but something was like poking around in camp the first night and was like brushing up against his tent and breathing real hard and stuff. So I don't know what it was, but I don't think it was friendly, whatever it was, and so I was talking to Chance. I was like, we didn't, other than like the first night in camp when we had something in camp, I was like, we didn't really see, any black bears, we didn't see any, mountain lions or whatever. He's like, you may not have seen any mountain lions. He's like, but I'm sure you walked underneath more than one. And I was like, really? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, there's lots of mountain lions around here. He's like, I promise you. He's like, you've walked underneath a tree. One's been sitting in a tree and you walked correctly underneath of it. And I'm like, holy shit. I was like, I'm glad I'm learning that as I'm leaving. It's like,
that's the thing about the predators out here is they're there and don't know it most of the time. Yeah. I think they did a study in Washington in one of the parks over there. They collared 4 or 5 cougars, and I'm probably going to misquote how the study went, but essentially at the end of this, they were showing that this was a very public park, and a lot of people walked by these cougars within 30 feet of them and had no idea they were there.
Wow.
And because they could see, the cougars with the trackers next to the walking trail and people walking by them and having no idea. And so, that stuff happens everywhere, everywhere you go. Most of the time, growing up here, if I had $1 for every time I've seen a cougar in the woods, I might be able to buy an afternoon.
Right.
So they're very elusive. Now, if I had $1 for every time I walk back to my truck and found cougar tracks in my boot tracks, I'm
You're
money.
rich, man. Right.
Which raises the hair on the back of your neck. You know, even growing up with the predators, you're just kind of like, man, I don't like that.
Right. I don't like that. No, sir. My buddy was in, where was he at? It wasn't last year, it was the year before. He might have been in Idaho somewhere, maybe. Maybe not. I forget what state he was in. But there were, like, the area he was hunting, there was clear, like, grizzly signs. Like, grizzlies live here, like, carry spray, do whatever. Like, if you see one, like, go the opposite way. Like, just, like, here are some bear rules, right?
Right.
And they're walking in, and he saw a couple bear tracks, you know, that were clearly, like, they were grizzly tracks. And he's like, oh man, that sucks. Like, but I don't know how old the track is or whatever. He's like, it could be 3 days old. Like, who knows where he's at or whatever. He's like, so we go and we hunt, you know, and he's like, and then they're long story short, they were coming back, and as they were coming back, he was like, he's a former, like, undercover narcotics cop, so he's like used to crime scenes. He's like, dude, he's like, I'm walking back. He's like, it looks like a freaking crime scene. He's like, there's blood everywhere, like, there's parts of stuff. He's like, and as we go, he's like, I find, like, the head of, like, a deer that got killed, you know. He was like, and then there's, like, a huge, like, set of grizzly paw prints, and he's like, let's get the F out of here. He was like, never have I been so scared in my life, you know what I mean? He was like,
it's a weird feeling when you're not top of the food chain.
yeah.
Well, until you experience it, I can't really explain it, but it's animalistic. And you were like, you know, I am not the top predator out in these woods. Not only am I not the top predator, but I'm ill-equipped against the top predator, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a different ballgame.
Right. But speaking of being a predator, you know, when you're walking into these setups, right? Like, give me your ideal setup. Like, from, like, you found a scrape, and, like, you know, let's say there is a way to get into that scrape that Wilson and I found, right? Like, how are you setting how are you picking the right tree? Like, how are you situating in the tree? Like, what does your setup look like?
So my perfect setup is gonna be on the east side of the mountain. Generally on a ridge line on the east side of the mountain. And that's for my area, right? Because our prevailing winds are southwest winds. So 95% of the time, I'm going to have a good wind. If I'm sitting on the east side of the mountain, going to be blowing across my face, over my shoulder. Generally, ridge lines are where I'm looking at. I'm walking these ridges, especially the spots where I know, where I've seen, okay, now I've got some parallel movement across this mountain. I've got a nice bench here, got a community scrape that's already here, something to that effect. And I've got a steep drop off behind my back. So that's where my kill tree is. It should be 99% of the time I can go in there and I can, even if I've got a half-ass decent wind where it's like favorable to the deer, those thermals should be pulling so hard behind me where the deer, don't want to walk. I mean, even a big mature buck is lazy. If he doesn't have to walk in the bottom of this entanglement, in the bottom of this draw, he won't do it. Right. However, he is going to J-hook. He's going to come in every single time. He's going to try to get down one of you. He's going to J-hook in. And so if you don't give him that ability, right, you're sitting up high and got the good thermals and got the good prevailing winds, you're not going to get busted. So how am I getting into these spots, right? So that's the tough part. So I either I'm coming from the bottom, which kind of sucks because you're sweating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes if that's my only option, that's what I absolutely have to do. I have literally walked in basketball shorts in the middle of winter because I did not want to sweat. I don't want to give these deer anything. But if I walk in all these clothes that I need to sit for 10 hours, I'm going to sweat so goddamn bad. I'm not going to stop sweating for the next 3 hours sitting in my stand.
And then you're going to be cold.
Then I'm going to be cold.
Yeah.
So I walk in. It's just stupid stuff like that, right? If you have to come in from the bottom, which sometimes you do, prevent your sweating as much as possible. If you do sweat, then you're close. You know, force up 300 yards shy, 200 yards shy of your stand, and spray back down, wipe back down, clean yourself as best as possible. Do everything you can to give yourself the most. I mean, obviously, deer's nose, you're just not going to do it. But
right.
If you don't put as much odor into the air as possible, you got a better opportunity.
Right. And, control the things you can control.
Right. Exactly. You know, if you got very, very low amount of odor, I've had the wind switch on me where, you know, deer are like, no, I don't like that. Smell something, but it's not such a strong odor that they're just blowing the hell out of it.
Right.
You know, if you get 1 or 2 extra chances maybe with the does, now obviously with the mature bucks, you get one opportunity, you mess it up.
Yeah.
So a lot of times if I can come in from the same elevation, if I have to walk up through that hill hole, I will. Oftentimes I'm really just trying to ride the edge of that drainage. There, I'm coming from the top of the bottom. I'm riding the edge of that drainage. I know that buck is probably going to jay hook in at some point and probably cut my track on the edge of that. That's fine. All right, I'm spraying my boots down. If I get into any sort of situation where I can find some birch trees, burnt wood, I'm rubbing my boots in it. I'm doing dumb shit, right? I'm doing everything I can to my favor. I mean, if you took a video of me going into the woods, it could probably be on Comedy Central. It gets laughable at some point. But so textbook for me, right, is I'm looking east side of the mountain. I want those prevailing winds. So wherever those prevailing winds are for everyone else on the other side of the Rockies, I'm not sure what that is. I know a lot of our winds are westerly winds.
Yeah, we get a lot of west out here. It's west and southwest a lot.
So fairly common, same thing, right? On the back side of the mountain, on the west side of the mountain, it gets tougher, right? Because oftentimes those southwest winds are blowing uphill, where I want my thermals to be going downhill into some nasty drainage. Right? So what do? Well, your next best thing is to find a giant opening behind you, you know. And so, what does that look like in the mountains? A mountain meadow, perhaps. It's tough. A big mature buck is not going to walk out in those great big openings, you know. And it's at night, yes, you obviously get pictures of them at night, but and you may get a doe to walk behind you in those openings, and you're gonna get busted. But again, you just gotta play the percentages, right? You gotta do what you can. So yeah, I'm looking for the big openings behind me. So the videos of these guys hunting, facing the big opening, you know, back in the Midwest in these hunting shows, he laughable to me. The idea, it's just not something I would do.
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable. It's even like here in the East, like where, you know, there's a lot of hunting pressure and stuff like that. It's like, it's the same. Yeah, I mean, different, you know, scenario, but for similar reason, right? It's like, they're just not going to show themselves in the daylight. You know, it's like, and so those things are, I just kind of refer to those as like deer wastelands, you know, as far as like hunting opportunities go. I mean, there might serve a purpose. There might be some food in there. They're going to hit it in the evening or whatever the case is. But for my purposes, other than like maybe gaining inventory and putting a camera somewhere there to get intel, you know, and like who's in the area, like they're pretty much useless. But you've mentioned cameras a couple times. How are you using cameras like in those mountains? Like, are you focusing primarily on like primary like community scrape areas and that's pretty much it, or do you have a different approach?
Yeah, so most of my cameras are gonna go on a community scrape, either A, one I found, or B, one I built. it's going to be a high percentage spot. Because
you may not get a deer if you don't have it in like the right spot. Like, in a deer density heavy area, it's like you'll get deer by accident, but you're not, even by accident, you're not going to get one.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I don't have evidence that deer are, coming through, whether horizontally across this mountain, a good horizontal trail, or they're coming, I got a good game trail that's coming up and down this ridge, where I just straight up found a really nice community scrape, but all the marking, I'm not putting a ton of cameras out. Last year I probably put out more cameras than I ever have before, but generally, one side of the drainage is getting a camera. I go to the other side of the drainage, it's getting a camera. Cameras aren't cheap, and unfortunately, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've lost a lot more of them. And I've been able to afford it historically. I don't let elk hunters in there finding my spots, taking my cameras, or the land is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller to actually empty deering. And some more and more people are in there. Right. So I'm generally trying not to lay out a ton of cameras that are kind of giving me a way to goes. Obviously the higher you can get the camera, the better. Get out of people's eyesight, out of the deer's eyesight. I've had big mature bucks come in for the first time ever and look straight at my camera, and they never came back.
Right. Yeah. They didn't like the picture taken.
Yeah. Okay, that was in my bedroom yesterday, and I don't like that. So I'm
right. As far as like hunting, do you hunt relative? Because guys do different things, and depending on the setup, I'll do it either way. Some guys will hunt areas that they have a camera in, like so. Like for me, for example, if it's a really, really good scrape and it's in heavy enough cover and it's not like they have to open themselves up, it's like I will hunt on top of that camera. I don't have a problem. Some guys don't like to hunt close to their cameras just in general. They never do. Where do you kind of fall with that? Do you hunt like the areas where your cameras are at, or are you hunting off those areas? What's your kind of approach to that?
I'm pretty much hunting on top of my cameras, generally because I am strictly hunting community scrapes, right? And so I know that deer, if he's going to hit that scrape, I want to have a good shot at him. And so my cameras are always facing my community scrape. Yeah, I'm right on top of them. I'm usually within 20, 30 yards of them anyway. And it was only a handful of times have I, set up cameras in the surrounding area that I wasn't sitting on directly. And one being that giant buck that I killed. I hunted him for 2 years, and the first year I hunted him, I did him on camera in the straight, and minutes after the end of legal shooting line, regularly, and I'm like, this something, I'm missing something, right? And so I set up kind of a swath of cameras. I put 4 cameras in various areas to where he thought he was coming in. And sure enough, picked him up on camera 75 yards away. And he was standing there for 45 minutes during the daylight. He knew I was in my stand. He didn't care. He was just sitting up there waiting because he wanted to circle down and check does, and so that was one instance where a buck, I kind of learned a ton about him by putting an additional camera up where I couldn't see him. Right. Couldn't see him where he was at. Never heard him come in. Nothing like that. He'd probably listen to me get out of my stand and go back.
Well, I'm sure.
The following year, guess what I did? I moved my tree stand where that son of a bitch was standing. Get the scrape behind me. And the first time he came in, late season, checking those does, I killed him an hour and 20 minutes before end of legal shooting line. He walked in where he walked in plenty of times before, plenty safe, and I still had a good wind because it was on the edge of this nasty little drainage. And Now I had to cross over where he was standing, what I would have expected a lot of my bows to be better than. And so I really, really not want to do it. But if that's where he was at, that's where he was at, right? And so I had to figure out how to do it. And I killed him, just killed him at 14 yards. And so, again, I guess short answer longs for you there. 99% of the time I'm on top of my cameras, unless I have some other intel to tell me otherwise.
Right. Man, we got to get you a saddle set up, man, so you don't have to be lugging a stand into those mountains anymore, man. It's like out those mountains. Like the one thing whenever I was walking those mountains, I was like, man, anyone who hunts deer out here and carries a stand, I was like, they are strong and crazy. I was like, because I ain't carrying a stand up any of this.
It's funny you bring that up. Me and Wilson have had this.
I was gonna say, I'm sure he's already been on it.
I don't think you would get away with it.
No,
I don't. These deer are so finicky that the idea that you could draw your bow behind a tree and swing out and kill this deer is insanity to me. And maybe I'm giving them more credit than I deserve. And I've got to try it to prove my own point or to prove everyone else's point. Other part being is we don't have a ton of trees that,
that's true.
Too many branches on them.
Yeah.
I can see that being extremely effective elk hunting over a wallow, going in drainage, finding different wallows, setting up your saddle, wait for those elk to come in the morning, that sort of situation. But, I guess, for example, I had a giant, 170s come in on me. I had never seen this deer before in my life. And mind you, I don't rarely ever see a deer that I've never seen before. Like I know what's in the area, and I don't know what prompted this deer to come in when he did, what happened, but he came in and I was flat-footed. I didn't even realize what he was. I watched him building a scrape 40 yards from me in the brush for 30 minutes. What in the hell is this deer doing? And then he stepped out into my little pocket that I had there, and it was just like, oh shit, that is a giant. I did not recognize. And I drew my bow. He was off on my right, really, really hard. And that was my mistake. I could put my stand in a bad spot.
See, now if you had a saddle, you could have swung around the other side. You'd been fine.
And that's where I think I could have made the shot opportunity, right? But when I drew my bow, my elbow just kind of brushed the bark on the tree. Didn't bang on the tree. It was just like on the tree. And that deer he didn't blow, he didn't snort. He was gone so fast, it would blow your mind. And that's how they survive out here, right? And that's why I'm like, I don't know if a saddle would work,
Well, they have so many predators out there, man. They're just keyed in.
Right.
It's
they don't.
And it's not even you necessarily. It's more so.
Means that noise doesn't keep you alive out here, right?
Right. I was just going to say, it's not necessarily people per se, like it is here in the East, where it's like hunting pressure is like the big thing why they're always keyed up. It's like out there, you're like the third on the list of or fourth on the list of the things they're worried about killing them. It's like, and probably the least efficient at killing them.
Exactly. Oh yeah. I can't smell a deer when I'm on top of it.
Right.
Not very efficient killers when it comes to hunting big whitetails. And what's interesting to that point is probably the number one killer of mature whitetails in Idaho is cougars.
Really?
And it's because big mature whitetails, they're solo, right? They're always solo. So they don't have 8, 10 eyes and ears and noses to keep them alive, right? Like the does and everything else. And so a lot of times when I'm finding deadheads, big mature buck deadheads, it's got a crushed nose, very obvious cougars. And I think in the same instance, that's why a lot of mature buck don't get killed by wolves. They'll move out if the wolves move in, but a big mature buck by himself isn't leaving a whole ton of scent for wolves to track down. I mean,
Right.
white elk are easy prey for wolves. They can smell the damn things a country mile away.
Right.
Yeah. Or does or something to that effect where, cougars are much more keyed in. And well, yeah, that's
Efficient killer.
extremely efficient killer. And so anyway, as far as saddles go, I'm so hesitant, and I think it would have to be one of those situations where it's like, hey, I've got an extra doe tag. All right, let's go up here. Let's go hunt these
And try.
right up north. Even the does are keyed in.
Right.
Does don't get away with anything. And that way, I'm not blowing my opportunity on a giant 5.5-year-old Northern Idaho whitetail. I'm doing it on a doe if the saddle just doesn't work out.
Right. And so, yeah.
I'd be interested to try it.
All right. Well, we'll have to report back and see how Wilson, how he does getting you into, how he does getting you into one. But, speaking of kind of getting dialed in and so forth, my season just kicked off. I should be getting out here soon, but I'm going to ask you. Well, I'm expecting, because you changed jobs recently. I shouldn't say jobs. You changed careers. So I'm thinking now that you're in the outdoor space officially, right? You recently opened North Idaho Archery, right? Is the business that you opened, and so I'm thinking now that like you should have like all this free time now, right, to hunt whitetail. No, I'm just kidding. But how did the archery shop come about, man? Like that's a pretty good transition from, a deputy to, being in law enforcement to, owning and operating an archery shop.
Yeah. So, obviously I mentioned before I was county deputy. So I was working with a guy named John Fontaine, one of my business partners now. And he was a deputy back in the Midwest, Minnesota, I think to be specific. And he came out here and he was copping with me. And, both of us were combat veterans. Both of us are cops. We had spent most of our adult lives working for the government, and we were sitting around a campfire drinking whiskey, just kind of bitching about our jobs,
Where all good ideas start.
What are we doing? What? Do we enjoy being cops, And he's like, are we good at it? Maybe. Maybe not. It depends on who you ask, but
right.
He was like, can we see ourselves being a cop for 30 years? And both of us would just think back when you can't. Right. Not going to happen. And so there was the whiskey brainchild, right? It's like, well, okay, what next? And I said, well, hey, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho doesn't have a pro shop. Hasn't had a pro shop in over 20 years. Needs a pro shop. There's a ton of archery hunters, especially for elk, especially, and that's a niche that we could have in that market. And both of us were like, okay, well, that's great and all, but do we know anything about working on bows? And we had both just kind of fumbled around working on bows. We could kind of do some things here and there, but either one of us honestly that good. And so, being the kind of personalities you are, I was like, well, let's go make ourselves great. How do we make ourselves great? We went and we got master certified, the PSC's master certification school, which is taught by Alexander Kirilov, which might not mean anything to your listeners, but he's a world-class archery shooting coach, one of the best in the business on working on bows. He's got like 6 of the top shooters in the entire world ever shooting underneath him. But he taught us how to be Olympic shooting coaches. He taught us everything. These more than the manufacturers on how to work on these bows. It was insane.
Nice.
Not a cheap class, right? It's not a cheap class, but it's well worth the knowledge. And we get 30 years of knowledge put into a week or two. And, from there, we just kind of expanded on knowledge. We've gone to a few different certification courses and really nailed down everything that we were doing. We kind of tested ourselves with, friends and colleagues and people that we know and say, hey, like, this is the knowledge we have. Let us work on your bow. You have any negative feedback to us. And so during that time, we were working really hard to open up a pro shop. And we just kept getting kicked in the teeth by the county government there. They didn't want it.
It's odd.
They wouldn't give us a conditional use permit. They really wanted houses where we wanted to put our shop. We had invested. We had all sorts of things that this was going to happen. And, during this time, we were gaining a reputation amongst our friends as far as, our quality of what we were doing on these bows, which was giving us the confidence, like, hey, we know what we're doing. We need to keep doing this. Right. Guys, my bow has never ever shot better than this. And not to, try to tout our horn, but that's the feedback we're getting. Like, I was like, right, this is incredible. We guys before are just trying to figure out how to tie a dealer on, and you got my bow shooting better than it came from the factory.
Right.
And, which, we put a lot of heart and effort into each one of them, Bobby. I wouldn't put a bow out that I wouldn't go into a true stand with myself. And so, I'm hunting giant whitetails, so I'm taking care of those bows.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had pretty much given up on this pro shop idea. I had left being a county deputy. I went to work for a local police agency south of me, a little closer drive to home. And John, he had become a realtor, and he found this building that was absolutely in shambles. And he's like, hey, they can rent this thing. Yeah. Only going to get 20-yard indoor range, which is not the crazy outdoor elevated platforms, all the crazy stuff we wanted to do, but it's a pro shop, right? We can do that. But at the same time, another individual, Austin Johnson, my third business partner, gets three of us. He was moving out here. He was copping with John back in Minnesota. And he said, hey, I'm coming out, and I don't know what I want to do. You guys still want to do this pro shop? Like, he had been working at the pro shop for multiple years before that. And so it was like, well, we know what we're doing. Let's do it, And so we got this building. We all quit our jobs and spent 5 months remodeling this place. And it's been insane. I mean, nice. From the thing we opened up our doors until now. I mean, they just closed the shop this week to go elk hunting. Yeah, we've got half a dozen people like, hey, can I please come in? I need to work on my bow. I did this, did that, And so, and we are, one or two of us say, hey, we'll come back to town.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that was kind of our transition out of law enforcement.
That's awesome.
And guys like, they kind of give a shout out to guys like Greg Anderson. He was a law enforcement officer. He got out, and my business partner's got to go meet him at the Black Rifle Coffee Company.
Greg Anderson, he's also a jiu-jitsu guy, man. That's how I know of him. A buddy of mine actually trains at I think North Electric Jiu-Jitsu, I think is the name of his gym that he opened. A buddy of mine who trained with me here, Purple Belt, Troy, shout out to Troy. He doesn't hunt, so he probably won't listen to this, but anyway. He moved out to your neck of the woods and actually, ended up meeting Greg and now trains, jiu-jitsu with him in his spot. So, dude, it's crazy that, like, how worlds are connected. Like, Greg and...
It is crazy, but anyhow, yeah, he was a huge motivator, just to kind of show guys, hey, there's the world outside of law enforcement. But once you get in there, it's like you got a decent paycheck, you got a pension, you got health,
yeah.
You got all the things. It gives you just enough to keep you captive, right?
That's it.
You got some guys that are like, man, I really want to do something else. And so just like the three of us, being able to get that motivation from an outside force, it's like, hey, you can do it, right? And it's possible. And then it affecting, right? So that's the super cool thing is, not John like guys say, partnerships leads to sinking ships or something weird to that saying, right? But we all have the same mindset. We're all combat veteran. We're all hardcore outdoorsmen. We all are the kind of guys who take extreme pride in our work. So there's a little bit of competitive edge in the shot where he's like, okay, who can build out the best bow, right? Who can who can be the best tech in the shop? And frankly, right now, I don't think there's any one of us that could say, yeah, like guys doubled it. Yeah, everyone does incredible work. And so it's worked out really well. Yeah, that's
awesome, man. Dude, I'm super stoked for you. I know when Wilson met you, like I love Wilson, man. He's like one of my favorite people. Like it was the way I don't even remember how he and I met exactly, but he's one of those people that when you meet him, you're like, yeah, we just became best friends. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like that's just kind of how he is. You know what I mean? It's like, and we're still that way today. And so whenever he at one point, I don't remember, he texted me or called me or whatever it was. And this is kind of how I came to know of you. Is he was like, hey, I met these guys. They opened up the North Idaho Archery shop, in Coeur d'Alene. I think it's in Coeur d'Alene, right? Is where it's located. Yeah. And he's like, they're super awesome. He mentioned you. He's like, you got to have him on. He's like, awesome hunter, killing giant whitetails. He's like, he mentioned, he's like, he knows Troy. And then like he was making all the points of connection. You know what I mean? Because that's Wilson. I always say Wilson's superpower is to connect people. If he ever decided to be a politician, I don't think he should be, but like he would be really good at it.
I was saying this to my wife the other day. Wilson, you like Kevin Bacon, the 9 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
That's Wilson.
Yeah.
Anyone knows Wilson.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone should have a Wilson in their life is what I always tell my wife. Awesome, man. Well, hey, dude, I've kept you here for, a little over an hour and close to 20 minutes here. I want to be sensitive to your time. But before I let you get out of here, let people know where they can find information about the shop. Let people know, what social handles you guys are at, stuff like that, so people can follow along with what you guys have going on. And if they're local or close by, that they can get their keystone to your place.
Yeah. So we're on Instagram. I mean, just North Idaho Archery would be too easy to find us. We're on Facebook as well, but we spend probably a lot more time on our Instagram. It's just a lot easier for us guys want to see what technique. You can go onto our website, northidahoarchery208.com. There's all of our profile information on there and everything that we offer at the shop. And couldn't tell you our phone number off the top of my head, honestly, but if you look us up online, you'll be able to find us. Give us a call, come on in. We love this chat with people. Yeah, we love this discourse. We have guys come in all the time, just drink coffee and talk hunting, and that's what we're all about. We do have a 24-hour access indoor range, so that's nice for folks who are coming in to work late, and so that's been kind of a crowd favorite for the folks that, especially this time of year. If you're headed out to elk camp and well, shit, I bumped something on my bow. Let's go to the range at 3 o'clock in the morning. Make sure it's still ready to go.
Yeah.
Good luck now.
Nice. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Congrats on the bull this year, and good luck chasing some giant mountain whitetails. And hopefully, I literally was talking to Wilson like 2 hours ago. He and I were talking. He called me, and I think I'm going to try to come back out next year. So if not before, hopefully I'll get to run into you then.
Well, I hope to have you out, Clint, and we'll get you into some elk. You're looking to chase whitetails, I'll take you to Wilson spots.
No, sounds good, buddy. I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you would do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.